Mike Tyson's Punch-Out was released for the NES in 1987, and to this day, it's one of the most famous examples of a celebrity-endorsed video game. Aside from Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, few video game franchises rival the star power and memorability of this 8-bit boxing game. While modern ports of the game have lost Iron Mike as the final boss, with Nintendo failing to renew the license to his likeness, Mike Tyson will always be remembered as one of the hardest video game bosses of all time. A lot of people have played Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, but very few have actually been able to get to Tyson, let alone beat him. It's a pretty hard game, with Mike himself standing no chance against his video game counterpart.
Just making yourself mad.
Tyson was recently back in the public spotlight when he lost to Jake Paul in their recent exhibition match. No matter what you think about the entertainment value or outcome of that fight, one thing is certain. Mike Tyson is definitely not in his prime anymore, and hasn't been for some time. I think it is commonly agreed that if he were in his prime, it wouldn't have even been a contest for him to go up against Paul. I truly think Jake may have died if he tried to go up against a prime Tyson. There isn't really a way to confirm this, but conversations about hypothetical matchups are nothing new to the world of boxing.
You must be out of your goddamn mind. Joe Louis, the greatest boxer ever lived. I'll be with you boys in a minute. He was bad in Captain Clay. He bad in Sugar Ray. He bad in that. Who that? The new boy had Mike Tyson. Look like a bulldog. He bad in him too. He done whipped Mike Tyson there. He whipped all their asses.
What about Rocky Marciano?
Oh, there they go. There they go. Every time I start talking about boxing, a white man got to pull Rocky Marciano out their ass. That's they one. That's they one. Rocky Marciano. Rocky Marciano. Let me tell you something once and for all. Rocky Marciano was good, but compared to Joe Louis, Rocky Marciano ain't shit.
He beat Joe Louis's ass.
That's right, he did whoop Joe Louis' ass. Joe Louis was 75 years old when he fought. I don't know how old he was, but he got his ass whooped.
By no means am I a huge boxing fan, but this kind of debate isn't foreign to me by any means. Nerds do this all the time with all kinds of different media, both with real people and fictional characters. Usually, we refer to this practice as power scaling, essentially categorizing the level of power a character may have in comparison to others. Does this sound familiar to you? Who would win in a fight? Superman versus Batman? Mario versus Sonic? Godzilla versus King Kong? These crossovers happened largely in part because of the debates fans of these series had been having long before it came to the big screen. These comparisons can be difficult to make, as the physics and general rules for the worlds these characters inhabit vary widely, so it's nearly impossible to make a comparable power scale across all forms of media. This isn't an exact science by any means. With that being said, today I'm going to attempt power scaling on an arbitrarily micro level for no reason about a niche topic. I want to know how many fictional boxers could beat Mike Tyson in a boxing match. Why? I don't know. It's harder than ever to make unique tier lists, and this felt somewhat original. Plus, the recent Mike Tyson fight got me thinking about Punch-Out, so here we are. I'll be making a tier list in characters in order of the least likely to beat Mike Tyson to the most likely to beat him, with the top tier wiping the floor with him. There are a few rules I had in mind when choosing characters for this list. Number 1, they had to be an actual boxer. And by that, I mean they must at least be implied to have participated in some form of organized boxing in whatever media they're from. Number 2, as the name of the video implies, no real people will be featured in this list. This is strictly to speculate on Mike's ability to defeat fictional opponents. And finally, number 3, which may be controversial as it's a rule I struggled with for a bit. When judging these characters, I went back and forth with whether or not they should be allowed to use their special abilities. After all, this is a boxing match and not just a free-for-all street fight, so why should they be able to use magic or whatever other ability they might have? Simple. Mike Tyson is implied to be able to overcome a certain level of magic or special ability solely from his appearance in Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. Being the reigning champion of that game, it is easy to assume that Mike can handedly beat every opponent you would have had to in order to become champion in the first place. By that logic, Mike has fought a guy who can teleport, a strange mutant man that defines anatomy, and a man who seems to be using a performance-enhancing substance during the match. Punch-Out was the inspiration for this video, and I think not allowing characters to use their iconic abilities would ultimately make the concept less interesting. So, I'm allowing every character on this list to use their abilities as long as their abilities won't explicitly break the rules of boxing. There are still no weapons involved, and you aren't allowed to fatally injure your opponent on purpose, so there are still limits to what these characters will be able to do in these theoretical fights. But these are the full-powered, peak versions of these characters. That goes for Mike Tyson as well. He is at his physical prime under essentially perfect conditions. No holding back outside of fatally wounding the opponent. With that being said, let's get on with the tier list, starting at the bottom, D tier. Mike Tyson is definitely winning against these guys. Now, as I just discussed, the entire cast of the original Mike Tyson's Punch-Out immediately go into this tier. They have proven simply by being lower on the totem pole than Tyson in the original game that if they fight, he will win. Obviously, the stronger the opponent, the harder of a time Mike will have. Glass Joe will go down a lot easier than Sandman, but Mike has proven that he can handle all of them with no issue. But what about the fighters from other Punch-Out titles that Mike was not featured in? I don't plan to cover every obscure Punch-Out character, especially not the ones from the arm wrestling spin-off arcade game, but I will go over some of the standouts to illustrate a point. Starting with the obvious, Mike Tyson will beat the snot out of Gabby J. Being the Glass Joe of Super Punch-Out, he stands basically no chance of taking on Tyson. Aaron Ryan has a bit better odds in my opinion, and I even thought about moving up to the next tier for one reason: cheating. Aaron Ryan is a dirty fighter, so much so that it is baked into his character. This definitely puts a strain on my third rule for the list because, for Aaron, does cheating count as his special ability? If it does, I would imagine Iron Mike wouldn't be able to take many hits from the horseshoes hidden in Aaron's gloves. Regardless, Mac is still able to beat him during Punch-Out even with his cheating. So I think at the end of the day, Aaron still belongs in this tier with his fellow Punch-Out alumni. Bear Hugger is another interesting case. His size would definitely make damaging him a challenge, but if Mike can take on not only King Hippo, but opponents considered much stronger, then Mike can definitely beat this super-sized Canadian. And finally, Disco Kid. I really only included him as he is one of the few completely new additions to Punch-Out for Wii, but since he is featured in the minor circuit alongside other mediocre fighters, I think it's safe to say he loses to Tyson pretty easily. Now let's move on from Punch-Out for now and start filling out the rest of this easily defeatable tier of fictional characters, starting with the weakest characters on the entire list, the Rock'em Sock'em Robots. Being made of plastic, this isn't a question of if these toys will lose to Tyson, it's how fast can Tyson break apart plastic with his bare hands. Barely a fight, but these are iconic boxing characters that should be on this list no matter their chances. Next up, we have Joe Yabuki from the manga and anime Ashita no Joe. The series follows Joe's boxing career as he tries to become a professional boxer after gaining a passion for it and training while in prison. The tone of this series is quite somber sometimes, as it attempts to realistically portray the long-term damage that fighters sustain due to boxing. While Joe proves himself to be a respectable fighter throughout the series, there is a major roadblock stopping him from ever being close to fighting Mike Tyson: his size. These two probably wouldn't even be legally allowed to fight, as Mike always boxes a heavyweight, and Joe is a bantamweight, making the match dangerous to even perform. With no fancy special abilities at his disposal like later characters on this list, Joe would have practically no chance of even putting a dent in Tyson. Going to a much sillier end of the character spectrum for our next entry, we have Roger and his family from Tekken. You might think, hey, that's literally just a kangaroo. And yeah, he kind of is. More specifically, Roger is a kangaroo created with the ability to fight by the Mishima family. While Roger may seem out of place in a fighting game, longtime Tekken fans would know that fighting animals are not exactly a rare sight in this series. Not only did Roger enter the King of Iron Fist Tournament 2 against the rest of the roster, but he also started a family after the tournament ended. He met his wife, and the two had a Joey that they named Roger Jr. The family lived peacefully, seemingly having escaped the labs after Kazuya's fall from power. However, many years later, Roger was captured. It's never really explained who took him and why, but he ended up back in the ruined laboratories once owned by Dr. Boskanovich. Then, for seemingly no reason at all, Roger chose to stay there, living in comfort, until his wife and son eventually found him. Heartbroken by his abandonment, his wife divorced him, then continued to fight in the next tournament with Roger Jr. in her pouch. I am completely serious about all of this, by the way. Tekken lore is absolutely wild. Despite being a genetically engineered kangaroo, Roger and his family are still kangaroos. While kangaroos can be quite aggressive if provoked, I have no reason to believe that Mike would have a hard time taking one on. Hell, some Australians probably pick fights with these things for a laugh after a few too many beers. Roger weighs in at 176 pounds, making him a light middleweight in boxing, so he's not exceptionally big either. This one goes to Mike. Our final D-tier entry for this list is another manga character, Ippo Makunuichi. Ippo is a determined and hard-working young boxer. He's initially shy and lacking confidence, but he grows both inside and outside the ring, driven by a desire to protect those he cares about and prove his worth. Like any good piece of boxing media, his growth is shaped by his relationships with his coach, friends, and rivals, as well as his passion for boxing. Ippo falls into this tier for the same reason as Joe. He's just too small to be able to fight against Mike Tyson, which is a fact Ippo would know too well, as Tyson is mentioned several times throughout the series as a personal hero of his.
Being a featherweight, he's only a bit larger than Joe, making this fight end both ugly and quickly.
Now we're moving up to our next tier, C. Mike probably wins. In the case of most of these, Mike is probably going to win, but there is an aspect of unpredictability for one reason or another that could turn the tide in their favor if the opponent would be lucky enough. Some of the justification for these might be a bit of a stretch, but then again, so is this whole list. Starting off our C tier, we have Butch Coolidge from Pulp Fiction. When we meet Butch, he wins a fight that he agreed to lose on purpose, making himself a huge target to some very dangerous people. Not only does he win the fight though, he accidentally kills his opponent. Pulp Fiction does not give very many details on Butch's boxing career previous to this, other than the fact that he is generally pretty successful. However, we can probably assume that he is a more than capable fighter, being that he has the capacity to kill someone unintentionally. I don't think there's enough detail available about Butch to put him much higher, but given his applied brutality and the ability to escape a kidnapping, I think it would be foolish to say that he has absolutely no chance against Tyson. Next up, one name that strikes fear into the hearts of Nintendo Wii fans everywhere. Matt. Matt has the rare honor of being one of the few Miis that is recognizable by name. Appearing in Wii Sports, Matt's abilities in most sports he appears in are pretty lackluster, but not boxing. Not only does Matt serve as your trainer in the boxing training stages, but he is also the champion and final opponent of boxing. You may be wondering how Matt qualifies as a professional boxer. Well, you see, in Wii Sports Boxing, every player is given a skill rating based on their record of games so far. Anything above a 999 is considered a pro ranking, and Matt sits at a whopping 1500 to 1600 range. That puts Matt at well above the level of what is considered professional in the Mii's world. And with this championship status, you could assume that he is the strongest Mii boxer there is. While it is hard to get an exact scale on the size of the Miis, since they're based on humans, I'm working off the assumption that Matt wouldn't vary too much in size from Mike, and could potentially hold his own. World Champion versus Wii Champion would make for a more interesting fight than you might think. I think Mike still has it due to a longer reach and most likely higher endurance, but fighting against a guy with floating hands would definitely be an adjustment for Mike to get used to in the first couple of rounds. Sticking with Nintendo, we have the original underdog, Little Mac. Originally, Mac was going to score a little bit higher, being that you would need to beat Mike every time someone beat the original Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. The only problem? Have you ever beaten the original Mike Tyson's Punch-Out? Cause I sure as hell haven't. Before Dark Souls, Mike Tyson was the go-to unit of measurement for hard video game bosses. So yeah, Little Mac definitely has a chance of beating him, but not a great one. Building off of that, we have Mac's coach, Doc Lewis. Before training Little Mac in the Punch-Out series, Doc was a champion heavyweight boxer himself. Being that he was the champion at one point in time, and taught Mac everything he knows, he should at least have a chance at beating Tyson if he were still in his prime. We don't really get to see anything of Doc during his prime, but if he had a little bit more body mass, but with Mac's technique, he might have a little bit better chance than Mac to take down Tyson. Next is another character from Hajime no Ippo, Brian Hawk. Brian is a middleweight, so while still smaller than Tyson, he has a better chance than Ippo based on that alone. He also possesses an extremely violent fighting style that famously overwhelms the opponent with absolute bloodlust from Brian. The way people seem to describe fighting Brian is somewhat similar to the emotion people who fought Tyson seem to portray: fear. Brian is simply powerful enough against most foes that he barely needs to train to stay an excellent, relevant fighter. But Mike Tyson isn't most foes. Brian might have the strength and will to take on Tyson, but he lacks the technique and discipline. Mike's power was definitely standout, but he didn't lack strategy. Mike was calculated using his peekaboo style, which is referenced within the series itself. Brian may eke out a win with a few lucky punches, but Mike's slight size advantage combined with his better training habits and discipline during his peak years would have probably given him the victory in the end. Next, we go from Japanese material to American with Marvel Comics' Jack Murdock. Jack is the father of Matt Murdock, otherwise known as Daredevil. Like a lot of comic book parents, Jack mostly serves as a plot device to, spoiler alert, die in order to further the plot. Jack raised Matt as a single father, and after a serious accident causing Matt to lose his vision, he needed to begin taking bribes to lose boxing matches on purpose. This caused Jack's record to be pretty awful, but he was said to be an extremely skilled boxer and could really take a beating. For that reason, I think he has a chance against Tyson, but I don't think he has the proven record in the comics to place much higher.
Our next entry is the first of many from this film franchise, but ranking lowest among them is Adonis Creed. Adonis is no slouch of a boxer, and he has proven that throughout Rocky's spin-off, Creed. The secret son of former champion Apollo Creed, Adonis is trained by Rocky Balboa himself to take on a variety of tough opponents. Adonis is very technically skilled, arguably more so than both his father and Rocky due to more modern training techniques and hindsight of boxing knowledge. With that being said, he has never exhibited either the record or pure strength of either former champion, which is why he is here on this list, and why we won't see the others until a little later. Honestly, some of this comes from the way that the Creed movies themselves were created, with a slightly more grounded take on boxing, as boxers seem to take a little bit less concentrated of a beating during fights than during the Rocky movies. This in turn makes Adonis seem a bit weaker by comparison, even if that might not actually be true. But based on the evidence in the actual fights that you can see, Adonis seems like a strong competitor who could hold his own, but without a lucky break, Mike wins. Now, for another fighter from the Tekken series, we have Alex, the boxing dinosaur. Alex and Roger are both similar characters, both being genetically engineered for fighting. Without as interesting of a backstory, Alex is really only above Roger for one reason. Being a dinosaur rather than a kangaroo would make him arguably a bit stronger. And while he wouldn't legally be able to use his mouth to bite Tyson, it wouldn't exactly be a new strategy for Mike either. So I guess maybe Alex has a chance? And for our final C-tier fighter, we have Mr. Dream, the great value Mike Tyson from the re-releases of Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! Once Nintendo lost the license for Tyson's likeness, the sprite was put over Mike to serve as the game's new final boss. Now, for all intents and purposes, Mr. Dream has the same moveset as Mike did, so I was tempted to put him just a bit higher than this. After all, they should be on the same level, right? But I don't know. Just look at this dweeb. He's really the champion? Based on vibes alone, he can't be higher than C tier. That's it for C tier though. Time to get started on our next tier, B. Could go either way. These fights are honestly a coin flip, making for a competitive fight that would be incredibly entertaining to watch. Apollo Creed is our first B-list contender. Apollo, unlike some other entries in this list, doesn't need to rely on special abilities to make this fight fair. From what we see across the Rocky series, Apollo is an amazing boxer, and was the undisputed champion for some time before finally being dethroned in Rocky II. With his behavior modeled after Muhammad Ali, he would give Tyson a run for his money. Tyson tends to benefit the most when fights end quickly. Endurance and defensive fighters like Ali, and in turn Apollo Creed, tend to be harder for Tyson, as his hard punches tend to tire him out in later rounds. However, with Apollo proving that his overconfidence can get the best of him at times, I think it's hard to say which direction this matchup would go in. The next match that was too close for me to call was Steve Fox, our last boxer from the Tekken series. Steve is another product of genetic engineering, much like the last two Tekken entries, but the difference is that this time, he's an actual champion boxer. While definitely lacking in the size department compared to Tyson, Steve makes up for it in pure power and stamina, both of which defy his appearance. The entire Tekken roster that is important to the main story in any way is completely busted when it comes to power scaling. And with Steve being the genetic son of Nina, one of the series' most fan-favorite characters, he's going to continue to be put up against incredibly dangerous and threatening opponents. So if Steve can withstand lasers, robots, and actual bears, I think he's capable of holding his own against Tyson, even with a significant size difference. And I know, technically Alex and Roger take on these things too, but since they aren't really in Tekken's main story much, it's safe to assume that these characters aren't really meant to take on this power level canonically, at least in my opinion. The final member of B tier was actually quite hard to place. Balrog from Street Fighter is an interesting case, especially for this list specifically. In Japan, Balrog's name is actually M. Bison, and with him being a boxing character, it made it pretty obvious who they were trying to parody. In order to avoid potential legal issues when Street Fighter II cabinets made their way to the States, the names of 3 characters were switched, making Vega now M. Bison, Balrog now Vega, and M. Bison now Balrog. But it's clear from the beginning that Balrog was created with Mike Tyson in mind, so there are some things the two have in common that would make the fight pretty even. Both are relatively the same size, both have been heavyweight boxing champions, and both have a love of trash talk and showmanship. Balrog is much more chaotic in nature, however, with a much shorter temper and a scary sadistic side hidden underneath. He has proven to be quite powerful on many occasions, once killing one of Dalsim's elephants in one single punch. This power should class him well above Tyson, but I would argue that his hot-headedness might throw his technique off enough for Tyson to get the edge, but it's hard to say which way it would happen in the ring. This is one mirror match I would love to see for myself. The next fighter takes us up to Tier A. These fighters are likely to win if put up against Tyson. Tyson maybe irks out a win with some luck or particularly good momentum, but he is definitely going to struggle. First up is Gearless Joe from Megalobox. In this series, these boxers for the future use exoskeletons to fight one another, allowing them to make their attacks extremely powerful. Now this gear has the potential of breaking the no weapon rule I had already established, but in this version of boxing, this is the standardized gear, so I'd argue it's allowed. With that being said, after not using it in his first professional fight, he gained the nickname Gearless Joe by choosing to not wear it, so he probably wouldn't even need it. Joe has shown an immense amount of grit and constitution, being able to take quite the beating and survive even without his gear. I think his thin stature compared to Mike prevents him from being any higher than the lowest end of A tier, but I think he could take the win. Our next A tier combatant is the first and only DC Comics character on this list, Ted Grant, also known as Wildcat. Wildcat was a longtime member of the Justice Society of America, which was essentially the precursor to the modern-day Justice League. He filled in as the team's Batman in a way, with his main form of self-defense being martial arts, just without the utility belts full of gadgets at his disposal. He is a world champion boxer and possesses a seemingly magical 9 lives ability that contributes to overwhelmingly strong endurance. Being responsible for training Black Canary, Catwoman, and Batman himself in boxing, I think Mike would struggle taking down such a knowledgeable and powerful opponent. Following that is the other Street Fighter boxing character on this list, Dudley. Comparing the strength of Dudley and Balrog from the last tier is quite difficult. Through my research, it seems that the two of them are on similar levels when it comes to strength and ability in boxing, with the key difference being their fighting style. With this in mind, I think Dudley deserves to be here, slightly higher up than Balrog, because his style of fighting would be a better counter for Tyson. Dudley is a much more technical fighter, using a boxing style known as outboxing. Essentially, he is fighting more defensively and dodging attacks to wear out the other fighter while conserving energy. We've discussed already that this type of fighting style is something that Mike would struggle with his fight against Apollo, and with Dudley being world champion in a universe with fireball shooting warriors and green monster men, I think he more than earns his spot in A tier. Now for 2 entries that I will reveal and talk about together. Our last 2 movie entries, Ivan Drago and Rocky Balboa. Listen, I love the Rocky movies, so I'm going to try and approach this with as little bias as humanly possible. But you need to understand something. The standard of what real-world boxers are capable of is nowhere close to what characters from Rocky portray. Like I mentioned earlier, Creed's action is a little bit more down to earth, making Adonis fall lower on this list. And Apollo's overconfidence may be the weakness Mike needs to win, but these two have neither of those problems. If we're talking about Rocky from Rocky 1, he would definitely fall a lot lower on this list. But if we're talking about Rocky at prime strength, I think we need to look at Rocky 4. Drago and Rocky are comparable here, as Ivan literally killed Apollo Creed in an exhibition match and has a close, intense match with Rocky later. Throughout the fight, and even the training segments before, both fighters display ridiculously inhuman levels of physical ability, and can take more punishment than any human body should realistically be able to and keep fighting. Aside from maybe the first movie, the Rocky films are not meant to be serious looks into the life of a boxer. They are dramatic, over-the-top blockbusters about the strongest boxer in the world, defying logic and human capability to become the best. And that is why they kick ass. I try my best to not overuse these kinds of wikis while doing research for this video, as they can be swayed by a lot of different fan opinions, but the Versus Battles wiki lists many of Rocky and Drago's feats as superhuman because of how unlikely a human would be able to accomplish any of this. Rocky beat Drago, so he sits slightly above him, but I am confident that unless Mike gets lucky early into the match, both of them will have no problem winning. And now for our best of the best, S tier. If Mike gets in the ring with any of these fighters, he will not win under any circumstance. His best hope is to take a flop in order to maybe survive some of these, because the combination of abilities and physical strength make it impossible for Mike to even have a chance of victory. To start off our S tier, we have the Rock'em Sock'em Robots redesign from Rock'em Sock'em Robots Arena. Now that's what I call a deep cut. Now, if these were still just the plastic toys, they would remain in D tier with their classic counterparts. But these are a lot more than that. In 2000, Mattel introduced a new line of Rock'em Sock'em Robot figurines. They were all customizable, allowing you to swap out their weapons with one another, and they made for some really cool toys that I'm still really nostalgic for from my childhood. Rock'em Sock'em Robots Arena features a full roster of fighting robots, all with a wacky arsenal of weapons. It's not a great game, but it's really fun to mess around with. However, if any character from this game got in the ring with Tyson, they would most definitely win. Being made of metal and sporting bladed and blunt weapons for arms, it would be damn near impossible for Mike to even damage these guys, so their whole roster should be an S tier. For our next clear winner, we have the punching Pokemon, Hitmonchan. Now, at first glance, Hitmonchan is clearly made for boxing, but it might not appear all that impressive when you look at its size. Being only 4 foot 7 inches and 110 pounds on average, it seems that Mike's size advantage alone would make this an easy fight. But with Pokemon, power scaling makes no sense compared to the real world. Hitmonchan's Pokédex entries mention incredible feats like the ability to punch through concrete, punching volleys so fast that they're impossible to see, and that they can launch an opponent at over 300 miles an hour. Add that with the ability to perform elemental punches that could burn or electrocute Tyson, I don't really see how Mike even has a chance against a level 100 version of this thing, even with its small stature. Also, fun fact, many of Hitmonchan's Pokédex entries also say that he can fight for 3 minutes before needing to rest, which is the length of time of an official boxing round. Not super relevant, but a neat detail. Next is our final Marvel Comics character, Carl Creel, the Absorbing Man. Carl Creel started out as an aggressive underground boxer, even fighting Jack Murdock from earlier on this list at one point. Later, he turned to a life of crime, and after serving as an enforcer in a crime syndicate, he was put in prison for aggravated assault and extortion. While serving his sentence, he was approached by Loki to pick a fight against Thor. Now, how would a normal human boxer fight the God of Thunder? A potion that allowed him to take on the properties of anything he touched. After breaking out of prison and touching Thor's hammer one time, he became one of the hardest foes Thor ever had to fight. Needless to say, this ability could make Carl nearly unstoppable in the ring. He could touch the inside of his gloves and take on the property of the cushioning, making him damn near impossible to damage. Even if there was nothing in the arena to necessarily make his attacks any stronger, he could always touch a piece of steel on his way into the ring, and his pure durability would make him impossible to knock down, or even tire out, making him the clear winner. Next up is a character I'm sure everyone is familiar with, Donkey Kong, who actually shows up as a secret final boss in the Wii version of Punch-Out! Donkey Kong's boss fight is arguably harder than Mike Tyson's in the NES, but Donkey Kong earns his spot here for a lot more than that. While Little Mac is technically able to defeat DK, I think he was holding back. Donkey Kong is so strong that he can send physical shockwaves with his claps, survive in the vacuum of space, and punch the damn moon out of orbit. Donkey Kong and the Mario series in general lean into cartoon logic quite a bit to make their games as exciting as possible, which is fine, but when comparing it to the strength of actual people, yeah, this isn't just a monkey Mike would have to fight, this is a borderline deity. So, DK wins with no issue, and that makes sense as his fight in Punch-Out! Is a nightmare to go up against. But then I remembered, there was another time Donkey Kong boxed professionally. At the Olympics, with all of his friends, and Sonic's friends, which means technically, they all fit into this list as they've all boxed at a professional level. Oh boy. Okay, listen, this video has already gone on way too long for a topic as stupid as this one, but many Mario and Sonic characters absolutely clear Mike Tyson, so when I had this revelation about Donkey Kong, I felt like I had to try to include them as well. I know some of these will look absolutely ridiculous when I claim that they can beat Tyson, but I stand by these choices no matter how goofy they may seem. I'm not entirely sure which of these characters can even participate in the boxing event in-game, because I know some of these games are weird with what characters you can select, but I'm going to rank every playable character from the Olympic spin-offs just to cover our bases. We've come this far at this point anyway, right? So, I will roughly go from the weakest to strongest in this list of characters, and then we will finish with our final 3 who are neither from the Mario or Sonic franchise. To start, I created an E tier for one character. Why? Because Cream the Rabbit is a child, so this hypothetical fight should never happen in the first place. While Sonic character canon ages are kind of flexible and many could be considered too young to participate, it's normally agreed that Cream is only about 6 years old. In the game, she can be incredibly powerful with her Chow named Cheese to fight on her behalf. But having to fight on her own? Yeah, I'm just gonna keep you out of the ring on this one, Cream. Mike Tyson has one advantage over most of the cast of both of these series: size. Mario and Sonic characters are typically significantly shorter than an average human person, and not very muscular, calling their durability into question. So, in theory, Mike should be able to defeat the vast majority of these characters with ease, right? No, not even close. Much like Donkey Kong, these opponents have the benefit of being animated characters and having tons of different source material, giving them incredible strength potential compared to an actual person. Some of these characters would not only win, but pulverize Mike Tyson based on what they're capable of. But, anyway, let's continue with the definite losers, the D tier. First, Jet the Hawk, who is cool as hell, is amazing at riding a hoverboard, but doesn't have much else going for him. He has a great design, but he is in D tier along with his racing partner Wave for the same reasons. It's too bad that their third member Storm isn't in the Olympic titles, as he's arguably the only Babylon rogue who stands a chance in a fistfight. Next, two more combatants whose reliance on machines puts them at a disadvantage: Dr. Eggman and Eggman Nega, his alternate universe counterpart. Both of them use their machines during battle, and while they have shown to possess some level of physical strength, they don't have enough feats to their name to take on a professional boxer. The next one makes me a bit sad to put in D tier, because usually she can hold her own quite well: Rouge the Bat. She serves as a rival to Knuckles, so strength isn't the issue. The problem? She fights with kicks primarily, and this is a boxing match. Sorry, Rouge.
On the Mario side of things, let's start with the Koopalings.
None of them have been shown to have much in terms of physical strength, and aside from their spiky shells being a bit of a hazard, I think Mike would have no problem hitting them the 3 times it takes to defeat them in the base games. None of the playable Koopalings from the Olympics should be higher than D tier. Another of Bowser's minions, Dry Bones, would not do very well in this fight either. While he could definitely hang in there, being undead and impossible to kill, if he were knocked down 3 times in one round, he loses by TKO. And I doubt it would be very hard for Mike to knock down this little guy.
Birdo is arguably a little stronger, serving as a mini-boss in Mario 2 and having a bit more prominent of a role in the series.
Besides her ability to shoot eggs from her mouth, she doesn't really have a whole lot going for her when it comes to combat. Toad and Nabbit are both very small, and don't possess any abilities suited for combat either, placing them in this tier as well. And for our final D tier fighter, I sadly have to give the slot to Waluigi. I mean, look at this guy. Being as skinny and lanky as he is, and being relegated to sports and party titles, he doesn't really have a lot of feats of strength to pull from. This scrawny guy is definitely funny to watch in any game that he's playable, but he is not winning this fight, or really most fights. Next up, fighters that will probably lose, but actually have a bit of a chance. C tier. First up, Bowser Jr. Being implied to be slightly stronger than the Koopalings, I think he deserves a bit of a boost here. Similar to the reasons of Alex from Tekken, Bowser Jr.'s animal side could potentially give him a bit of an edge, but his size ultimately prevents him from being any higher on this list. He is damn near D tier, but with enough dirty tricks, he might do okay. It could be argued that since he is a child, however, he should probably be in E tier with Cream. The rest of C tier comes from the Sonic series, starting with Styx the Badger, who was introduced in the controversial Sonic Boom spin-off. While at many points she is implied to keep up with Sonic and the crew, her short temper and short stature don't make up for the lack of feats she has compared to the rest of the Sonic cast. Definitely not a slouch, just not enough data, or at least not enough that I know of, to place her any higher than this. Espio the Chameleon is an interesting character. He doesn't appear very often, but he is playable on quite a few occasions across the Sonic series, including a Sonic fighting game. He can keep up with Sonic and company during gameplay, so he is not lacking in speed. However, his combat abilities seem to be focused around stealth, which is a luxury you don't have during a boxing match. He clearly has some power, but I don't think enough to win without getting pretty lucky. Tails is similar to Eggman from earlier in this list, as he relies on machines to do most of his fighting for him. The difference is that Tails is shown to be pretty capable on his own outside of his machines. It just really isn't his ideal form of fighting. Keeping up with Sonic alone puts him in this tier with the others, but since he probably qualifies for E tier technically, I don't know how much higher he can be put. That's it for C tier. Now on to evenly matched fights with B tier, starting with everyone's favorite mini dinosaur, Yoshi. Yoshi has quite a lot of tricks up his sleeve, and while he isn't quite as strong as some of the other characters from his series, he makes up for it with speed. With enough tricky movement and strange gimmicks from things like tongue and egg abilities, I think Yoshi could potentially overtake and overwhelm Tyson for a victory even with his short reach. But I think it's just as likely that Yoshi is put out of commission early by a few well-placed hits from Tyson. Dry Bowser was kind of weird to play. While very large and seemingly powerful, I think his skeletal frame would prevent him from accessing the strength of a normal Bowser due to his lack of muscles. But otherwise, the fight feels pretty evenly matched. Although, if you would allow him to grow as large as he did for the boss fight in New Super Mario Bros. 2, then he'll have to move up to S tier for sure. Vector the Crocodile is our final B tier fighter. Being not only a crocodile but a Sonic character, Vector possesses immense strength. In Sonic Heroes, like every other power character, he is capable of crushing immense objects. However, I think in a boxing match in particular, Vector's large, long head would make it hard for him to avoid punches while facing Tyson. Even being on the high end of Sonic's characters when it comes to raw power, I think this weakness is enough to keep him held back to B tier. Let me start this next section with a statement. There are more characters in these next two tiers than you might think from these series. If it isn't abundantly clear already, power scaling for these games is absolutely ridiculous, even with seemingly mundane characters having superhuman levels of strength. I'm sure with a generous enough explanation, many of the characters I've already placed should be ranked higher. But with that being said, let's get onto the A tier, fighters who are likely to beat Tyson. Zavik and Zaz are strangely designed antagonists from Sonic Lost World, a game that isn't very well liked amongst most Sonic fans. Although they look pretty goofy, both have levels of speed and strength comparable to Sonic in base form, which alone puts them pretty high. I imagine that they could even be S tier, but to be honest, I don't know enough about either of them to rank them any higher. In a twist that surprises no one, Metal Sonic is another character that rivals Sonic in strength and speed. And while I did rank the Rock'em Sock'em Robot arena fighters in S due to their metallic bodies, Metal Sonic's base form looks significantly more frail, with the joints of his body potentially serving as a weakness. More than likely, his speed and power would overpower Tyson, but a lucky hit to one of these spots could likely end the fight early. If you wanted to take it a step further and argue that Metal Sonic's peak form is actually Metal Overlord from Sonic Heroes, then yeah, he's S tier for sure, but he wouldn't even fit in the ring then, much like Dry Bowser from before. To people who haven't played the Sonic games or read any of the comics, it may seem like Amy Rose should not be this high on the list. To those who have, this shouldn't be that much of a stretch. While she was relegated to the damsel role a few times, Amy has displayed feats of strength that rival most other characters in the franchise. One time, she smashed a huge robot with his own gigantic hammer. Granted, Silver helped her lift this telepathically, but even he claimed that Amy did most of the heavy lifting on her own. She is crazy strong, and the only thing preventing her from being S tier is her hammer is not allowed in the fight, as exterior weapons in a boxing match are illegal. But she was given an attack with boxing gloves in Sonic Battle on the Game Boy Advance, so she does have some experience in hand-to-hand combat. Shifting gears to the Mario side of things, we have Diddy Kong. Diddy Kong scores a bit worse than Donkey Kong, being that he is significantly smaller, but he is actually capable of a lot of the same things as Donkey Kong. For instance, removing the moon from orbit in an alternate version of the same scene, although with some help from his jetpack. Plus, small monkeys are known to really mess up a person's face from time to time, so even in the real world, this could potentially be a tougher fight than you might think for Mike. These next two might be pretty controversial, but yes, I think that Princess Peach and Princess Daisy have a pretty good chance of beating Mike Tyson in a boxing match at their prime strength. Let's take a look at the facts. Princess Peach has not only taken down Bowser and other threats on her own on occasion, but she has also assisted in taking down Kulex, who seems to be some kind of demon creature inspired by the Final Fantasy universe. On top of having healing magic, she also seems to have some sort of elemental bending in the DS games, allowing her to spawn fire, water, and wind on command. She even recently got more hand-to-hand combat experience in Princess Peach Showtime during the Kung Fu segments. So, that's all well and good, but then why is Daisy here?
Hi, I'm Daisy!
Well, for one, she was recently playable in Wonder, and was on Peach's exact level in that game. But beyond that, we need to go to a game familiar to viewers of this channel, Mario Superstar Baseball. In Daisy's bio, it is stated that while often compared to Peach, Daisy is both stronger and more tomboyish than her blonde counterpart. Daisy only has so much source material to go on compared to Peach, but if this statement is true, then she deserves to rank just as high. Now, would the league allow for these fights to happen? No, just like all of the women and child fighters on this list. But this does bring up an interesting angle, as Peach was originally pitched as the secret boss of Punch-Out for Wii instead of Donkey Kong. But producer Kensuke Tanabe said that he didn't like the idea of Little Mac punching women. You know, that's fair, but I think in this case it's Mike that should be scared of the princesses and not the other way around, because his margin of error needed for victory here is quite narrow. They are indestructible, with both clearly lacking security management resources to prevent kidnappings, but when left to their own devices, they are only beaten by our strongest tier. And now for the cream of the crop. No, not you, cream, get back down to E tier. S tier. I'm not sure if these next entries are necessarily stronger or weaker than our final 3, but I do think that at least the top 2 on this list would win against every other previous entry.
E123 Omega is a traitorous robot created by Eggman.
He's basically a more modern version of the Rock'em Sock'em Robots arena fighters, but arguably even stronger, so this one was pretty cut and dry. Like Vector, Omega can crush giant objects and is basically a giant metal weapon in himself. No chance, Mike. Blaze the Cat, while not as popular as Shadow, serves as an excellent foil to Sonic's character. She is extremely powerful and fast, rivaling most of the cast with the added benefit of pyrokinesis. Tyson would struggle just to get a hit in with her speed, and even if he did, he would be greatly burned as a result. She even has a super form called Burning Blaze, which makes her invincible, with flames engulfing parts of her body. Definitely not winning this one. If you've played Sonic 06, Silver the Hedgehog in S tier should be a no-brainer. If not, let this clip demonstrate how this fight would go.
It's no use! Take? It's no use! It's no use! It's no use!
Yeah, Silver has telekinesis. He can make Mike Tyson punch himself over and over again if he wanted to. The rest of his abilities are kind of irrelevant, so Silver wins on this point alone. Knuckles might be one of the most obvious S tiers on this list. Beyond the crazy strength of standard Sonic characters, he is also the one themed around being the strongest of the core group. He is named after his fists, so yeah, he's going to be a pretty good fighter. Knuckles is said to be as strong as Sonic is fast, and when you consider that many base versions of Sonic can canonically run comfortably at the speed of sound, this statement becomes a lot more meaningful. Tyson has no chance against this guy. Wario may look out of shape compared to Knuckles, but his strength is on par if not stronger than him. While kind of a gag character in some Mario spin-offs, in his own series, Wario does some pretty incredible things. Not only can he create an earthquake with a single punch, Wario is capable of surviving almost anything, and is stated to be immortal from the instruction manual of the Wario Land series. With this mix of pure strength and endurance, Mike definitely loses. Rosalina from Super Mario Galaxy takes the spot of the toughest woman Mike could possibly fight on this list, with the exception of maybe Blaze the Cat. While not featured in quite as many games as Peach or even Daisy, Rosalina is by all intents and purposes somewhat of a demigod to the Mario universe, at least from what I could tell. Originally, I thought she was even more all-powerful than she seems to be, but even though she relies on the Lumas for a lot of her magic, she has a lot of impressive qualities of her own. She is over 100 years old, so she's seemingly immortal, she has telekinetic capabilities, has the ability to fly, and can easily survive in the vacuum of space. When playable, it seems to me that she must be holding back an immense amount of power. But even if she weren't, in Super Mario Galaxy, she is still estimated to be 7 foot 7 inches tall. That's insane! Rosalina doesn't really even use her fists in combat often, but with the ability to magically reflect attacks, it's debatable if she even needs to throw a punch in order to win. Fighting against defensive strategies has never been Mike's forte, and a character who specializes in magical shields sounds like a nightmare for him to deal with.
Bowser is absolutely ridiculous when it comes to power scaling due to his lack of consistency across the Mario series when it comes to every single aspect of his character.
Can he talk? Yes! Unless it's Smash Bros, then he only growls like a monster. How big is he? Maybe about 2 or 3 times the size of Mario? Or 20 times? Or 100 times larger in games like Sunshine? I can't find an exact reason for this outside of gameplay convenience, but many seem to think it has to do with some Kamek magic trickery, which makes sense given how many giant enemies he creates in the Yoshi games. If Bowser is Sunshine-sized or Mario Party 10-sized, then all he needs to do to beat Mike is step on him. But even if Bowser is at a size more similar to Smash Bros. Or the old school Mario games, his fire breath, spiky durable exterior, and raw power should be enough to make this fight a cakewalk for him. So, if you've been keeping track in your head, these final 4 characters should be fairly obvious. Mario and Luigi on one side, and Sonic and Shadow on the other. Comparing their level of strength against each other is difficult, not that it hasn't been debated very often. That's probably the reason the Olympic spin-off exists in the first place. Although, I would personally love a proper, non-party Mario and Sonic crossover game at some point. Regardless, the reason it's hard to say who the strongest of these is they approach showcasing their power in 2 totally different ways. Mario and Luigi's strongest attacks, which can usually be found in the RPG games, are portrayed using over-exaggerated, old-school cartoon logic, with characters' proportions shifting as much as necessary to make the attack look as devastating as possible. I compare it to an old Popeye or Looney Tunes cartoon, where incredible acts of violence are committed in the most over-the-top way imaginable to soften the blow for the viewer. On the other end of the spectrum, you have Sonic and Shadow, who more use anime logic to showcase their character's power. I compare this more to something like Dragon Ball Z or One Piece, where every attack is meant to feel impactful and powerful beyond our understanding. Both have the ability to look strong, but what's actually stronger? Who knows? It's hard to say. It's kind of a matter of opinion if you believe Toon Force is stronger than anime power scaling. Regardless, Mike loses against every single one of these 4, and it's not even a competition. Mario and Luigi have plenty of combat experience, are capable of withstanding the force of black holes, and can bend fire and electricity respectively. Sonic and Shadow are faster than the speed of sound, and even light on occasion. Both are capable of teleportation, Shadow more so than Sonic, and both have taken on multiple godlike beings even in base form. If peak performance includes their super forms, they are even stronger, becoming invincible in the process. But if this is allowed for them, then the superstar should be allowed for the Mario Brothers to make them invincible. But no matter how you look at it, these 4 would individually destroy Mike Tyson in a boxing match, even if every single one of them is significantly smaller than him. With that, we move on to our final 3. You can thank Donkey Kong for that very extended intermission. Yeah. But now that we've collected a pretty sizable list of fighters, who do I think are the 3 best bets to beat Tyson in a boxing match? At number 3, we have you for the boxer. While you can't take on the strongest of S tier like Sonic or Donkey Kong, when it comes to taking on actual human boxers, you can't get much better than you. Yu has ridiculous strength and is considered the best boxer in the world in his source material. For Yu, time flows at a slower speed than everyone else, making him able to react much faster to every punch. He can also copy any fighter's style instantly, without the years of training those fighters put in to achieve that level of talent. That, in combination with his overwhelming strength, capable of damaging a fighter's internal organs with a single punch, it would be nearly impossible to beat him in a boxing match. If he didn't hold back, Yu would not only beat Mike Tyson, but I doubt he'd even survive the fight. Our number 2 slot goes to Akihiko Sanada from Persona 3. If you're making a tier list based on character strength, and you have characters from Shin Megami Tensei or Persona on it, odds are they're going to be near the top. SMT games and their spin-offs typically involving the summoning or defeat of multiple gods or godlike entities. Akihiko at peak form would likely be during the events of Persona 4 Arena, where he's a little bit older and significantly more muscular than when he was a teenager. But more important than his physical growth is the power of his persona. As a Persona user, Akihiko is infused with the power of his persona in a fight, making him damn near unkillable to a normal human being. With his persona, he gains the ability of speed of light reaction time, gravity manipulation, and can even create a pocket dimension to send the opponent to.
So not only is Akihiko highly experienced with boxing, being the star player and captain of his school's boxing team, but he is also on the relative power level of a deity. When his teammates use deadly weapons to fight shadows, he simply puts up his fists.
Sorry, Mike, but you lose this fight, and you lose it hard. JRPG characters are truly on another level when it comes to power scaling. Finally, we end on the oldest character on this list to ever be made, Apollo from Greek mythology. Apollo has been featured in many artistic works across many different mediums over the years. From statues to stories to games, many people have put their own spin on Apollo. You may know Apollo as the Greek god of the sun, or the Greek god of music, but Apollo is the creator and the Greek god of boxing. In classic Greek myth, Apollo punishes a cruel boxer named Phorbas, responsible for murdering many innocent people. Apollo challenges Phorbas to a boxing match, and proceeds to kill him with just one punch. That's just one example of his hand-to-hand prowess. Since Apollo has been around for so long, as I mentioned before, there have been a lot of versions of him over the years. One of his most destructive forms can be found in the manga series Record of Ragnarok. In this series, Apollo is capable of light speed reaction time, fire manipulation, after-image creation, enhanced senses, and more. On top of that, he is able to create a form called... The sun shall never set on me, embrace of the eternal midnight sun. Now that's a title. This form defies the laws of nature in many ways, as it allows Apollo to get stronger the more he lives up to the expectation of those around him, whether it be enemy or ally. In a stadium of people watching his match against Tyson, the better he would perform, the stronger Apollo would become at an exponential rate. Even if Mike had a chance in the beginning of the match, which he wouldn't, very soon into the match it would be absolutely hopeless. I should expect nothing less from the literal god of boxing. When writing this script, I was trying to find a through line or conclusion to this topic like I have with other videos up until this point.
Technically, I could have added a lot more characters here. I am definitely missing some minor characters and antagonists across a variety of these series.
However, one thing became clear the longer I worked on this video. This idea is incredibly stupid. There's a very popular show on YouTube called Death Battle that not only compares the power level of the featured characters, but even animates a fight scene between them depicting who they'd believe to be the winner. And with millions of views, do you think their audience is happy with who gets chosen to win in each episode? Of course not. In fact, most of the discourse I see about Death Battle has to do with how incredibly wrong they are. So what the hell do they know? And better yet, what the hell do I know? I feel like no matter how much justification and research I put into each of these entries, at the end of the day, there was always going to be holes in my knowledge of these characters, as well as bias towards my favorites no matter how much I tried to avoid it. I think Stan Lee said it best. Being the father of so many iconic Marvel characters,
He was naturally asked many who would win questions at conventions.
he had this to say about it in an interview.
Who would win in a fight if Galactus fought the Hulk? Or if Thor fought Iron Man? And there's one answer to all of that. It's so simple. Anyone should know this. The person who'd win in a fight is the person that the scriptwriter wants to win.
So that's it. That's literally all there is to it. No matter how ridiculous it sounds, with a little bit of a stretch, most fictional characters could beat Mike Tyson if the scriptwriter wanted them to beat Mike Tyson. It kind of just comes down to creativity. Mickey Mouse? Yeah, for sure if it's the Kingdom Hearts version. Kirby? Have you played any of the Kirby games? He fights deities on the daily. Mike Tyson is child's play to Kirby. Lightning McQueen? Yeah, dude, Mike can't even beat a car barehanded, let alone a sentient one. There will always be an argument for your favorite characters to win any fight. You usually just need to get creative and find source material that suggests strength beyond what they're capable of. Mike's disadvantage all along was being a real person. So, you can't pull feats or accomplishments from any fantastical fictional universe to establish his strength. But luckily, there is no fictional source material for Mike Tyson to go off of, other than Punch-Out! Especially one with cartoony physics and logic, otherwise that would call into question this whole video's premise. Son of a bitch.